Pilot qualifications. Question 1. What are the eligibility requirements for a private pilot airplane certificate? Be at least 17 years of age. Be able to read, speak, write, and understand the English language. Hold at least a current third-class medical certificate. Received the required ground and flight training endorsements. Meet the applicable aeronautical experience requirements. Pass the required knowledge and practical tests. What privileges and limitations apply to a private pilot? No person who holds a private pilot certificate may act as pilot in command of an aircraft that is carrying passengers or property for compensation or hire, nor may that person for compensation or hire act as pilot in command of an aircraft. A private pilot may act as PIC of an aircraft in connection with any business or employment if it is only incidental to that business or employment and does not carry passengers or property for compensation or hire. They may not pay less than the pro rata share of the operating expenses of a flight with passengers, provided the expenses involve only fuel, oil, airport expenditures, or rental fees. They may act as pilot in command of a charitable, nonprofit, or community event flight described in 14 CFR 91.146 if the sponsor and pilot comply with the requirements of that regulation. They may be reimbursed for aircraft operating expenses that are directly related to search and location operations, provided the expenses involve only fuel, oil, airport expenditures, rental fees, and the operation is sanctioned and under the direction and control of local, state, or federal agencies or organizations that conduct search and location operations. They may demonstrate an aircraft in flight to a prospective buyer if the private pilot is an aircraft salesman and has at least 200 hours of logged flight time. They may act as pilot in command of an aircraft towing a glider or unpowered ultralight vehicle, provided they meet the requirements of 14 CFR 61.69. And they may act as pilot in command for the purpose of conducting a production flight test in a light sport aircraft intended for certification in the light sport category, provided they meet the requirements of 14 CFR 21.190. Question 3. Explain the statement, may not pay less than pro rata share of the operating expenses of a flight. Pro rata means proportional. The pilot may not pay less than his or her proportional share of the flight's operating expenses with the passengers, provided the expenses involve only fuel, oil, airport expenditures, or rental fees. Number 4, the annual inspection for your aircraft is now due, and you have several friends that fly with you regularly to contribute money to help you pay for the inspection. Do the regulations allow for these contributions? No. A private pilot may not pay less than the pro rata proportional share of the operating expenses of a flight with passengers, provided the expenses involve only fuel, oil, airport expenditures, or rental fees. The regulation applies to the operating expenses of a flight and does not allow for the sharing or fixed or long-term operating costs of the airplane with passengers. Number 5. To act as a required pilot, flight crew member of a civil aircraft, what must a pilot have in his or her physical possession or readily accessible in the aircraft? A, pilot certificate or special purpose pilot authorization. B, photo identification. C, medical certificate. Number 6. While you're performing a pre-flight inspection on your aircraft, an inspector from the FAA introduces herself and says she wants to conduct a ramp inspection. What documents are you required to show the inspector? Each person who holds an airman certificate, medical certificate, authorization, or license required by 14 CFR Part 61 must present it and their photo identification for inspection upon a request from the administrator, an authorized NTSB representative, and a federal, state, or local law enforcement officer, or an authorized representative of the TSA. Number 7, what is the definition of a high-performance airplane, and what must you do to act as pilot in command of such an airplane? A high-performance airplane is an airplane with an engine of more than 200 horsepower. To act as pilot in command of a high performance, you must have A, received and logged ground and flight training from an authorized instructor in a high performance airplane, or in a flight simulator, or a flight training device that is representative of a high performance airplane, and have been found proficient in the operation and systems of that airplane. B, received and logged a one-time endorsement in your logbook from an authorized instructor who certifies you are proficient to operate a high-performance airplane. Question 8. Other than high-performance and complex aircraft, what other types of aircraft require specific training and logbook endorsements from an appropriately rated flight instructor? High-altitude airplane. No person may act as pilot in command of a pressurized airplane that has a service ceiling or maximum operation altitude, whichever is lower, above 25,000 feet MSL, unless that person has completed the ground and flight training specified and has received a logbook or training record endorsement from an authorized instructor certifying satisfactory completion of the training. Tail wheel airplane. No person may act as pilot in command of a tail wheel airplane unless that person has received and logged flight training from an authorized instructor in a tail wheel airplane and received an endorsement in the person's logbook from an authorized instructor who found the person proficient in the operation of a tail wheel airplane. The training and endorsement is not required if the person logged pilot in command time in a tail wheel airplane before April 15th, 1991. Number 9. What is the definition of a complex airplane, and what must you do to act as pilot in command of such an airplane? A complex airplane is defined as an airplane that has a retractable landing gear, flaps, and a controllable pitch propeller. It includes airplanes equipped with full authority digital engine control, FADEC, and to act as pilot in command of such an airplane, you must have A, received and logged ground and flight training from an authorized instructor in a complex airplane, or in a flight simulator or flight training device that is representative of a complex airplane, and have been found proficient in the operation and systems of the airplane. B, received a one-time endorsement in your logbook from an authorized instructor who certifies you are proficient to operate a complex airplane. Number 10. With respect to certification, privileges, and limitations of airmen, define the terms category, class, and type. Category, a broad classification of aircraft. For example, airplane, rotorcraft, and glider. Class is a classification of aircraft within a category having similar operating characteristics. For example, single-engine land, multi-engine land. Type is a specific make and basic model of aircraft, including modifications that do not change its handling or flight characteristics. A DC-9, a Boeing 737, a C-150. Question 11. What are the requirements to remain current as a private pilot? Within the preceding 24 months, accomplished a flight review given in an aircraft for which the pilot is rated by an authorized instructor, and received a logbook endorsement certifying that the person has satisfactorily completed the review. B, to carry passengers, a pilot must have made within the preceding 90 days 3 takeoffs and landings as the sole manipulator of flight controls of an aircraft of the same category and class, and if a type rating is required, of that same type. If the aircraft is a tailwheel airplane, the landings must have been made to a full stop in an airplane with a tail wheel. If operations are to be conducted during the period beginning 1 hour after sunset and 1 hour before sunrise with passengers on board, the PIC must have within the preceding 90 days made at least 3 takeoffs and 3 landings to a full stop during that period in an aircraft of the same category, class, and type of the aircraft to be used. Note, takeoffs and landings required by this regulation may be accomplished in a flight simulator or flight training device that is approved by the administrator and used in accordance with an approved course conducted by a certified training center. Number 12, you have not kept up with logging each of your recent flights. Are you in violation of any regulation? No. You're only required to document and record the training and aeronautical experience used to meet the requirements for a certificate rating or flight review and the aeronautical experience required for meeting the recent flight experience requirements. Question 13. You're flying in a single-engine, high-performance, complex airplane. You hold a private pilot certificate with an airplane single-engine land rating, but don't have a high-performance or complex airplane endorsement. Your friend who has these endorsements is acting as pilot in command for the flight. Can you log pilot in command time for the time you act as sole manipulator of the controls? Explain. Yes. 14 CFR 61.51 governs the logging of pilot in command time and states that a sport, recreational, private, commercial, or airline transport pilot may log PIC time for the time during which that pilot is sole manipulator of the controls of an aircraft for which the pilot is rated or has privileges. Note, this means you can log PIC time, but you cannot act as PIC. For a pilot to act as PIC, he or she must be properly rated in the aircraft and authorized to conduct the flight, which would include having the required endorsements for complex and high-performance airplanes as required by 14 CFR 61.31. Question 14. Explain the difference between being current and being proficient. Being current means that a pilot has accomplished the minimum FAA regulatory requirements within a specific time period, so he or she can exercise the privileges of their certificate. It means that you're legal to make a flight, but does not necessarily mean that you're proficient or competent to make that flight. Being proficient means that a pilot is capable of conducting a flight with a high degree of competence. It requires that the pilot must have a wide range of knowledge and skills. Being proficient is not about just being legal in terms of the regulations, but is about being smart and safe in terms of pilot experience and proficiency. Question 21. How will establishing a personal minimums checklist reduce risk? Professional pilots live by the numbers, and so should you. Pre-established numbers can make it a lot easier to come to a smart go or no-go or diversion decision than would the vague sense that you can probably deal with the conditions you face at any given time. A written set of personal minimums also make it easier to explain tough cancellation or diversion decisions to passengers who are, after all, trusting their lives to your aeronautical skill and judgment. Question 16. The airplane you normally rent has been grounded due to an intermittent electrical problem. You ask to be scheduled in another airplane. During pre-flight of the new airplane, you discover that it has avionics you're unfamiliar with. Should you go ahead and depart on your VFR flight? Pilot familiarity with all equipment is critical in optimizing both safety and efficiency. If a pilot is unfamiliar with any aircraft system, this will add to workload and can contribute to a loss of situational awareness. This level of proficiency is critical and should be looked upon as a requirement, not unlike carrying an adequate supply of fuel. As a result, pilots should not look upon unfamiliarity with the aircraft and its systems as a risk control measure, but instead as a hazard with high risk potential. Discipline is the key to success. Number 17. If a pilot changes his or her permanent mailing address and fails to notify the FAA Airman Certification Branch of the new address, how long may the pilot continue to exercise the privileges of his or her pilot certificate? 30 days after the date of the move. Question 18. What flight time can a pilot log as second in command time? A person may log second in command time only for that flight time during which that person A, is qualified in accordance with the second in command requirements of 14 CFR 6155 and occupies a crew member station in an aircraft that requires more than one pilot by the aircraft's type certificate, and B, holds the appropriate category, class, and instrument rating if an instrument rating is required for the flight for the aircraft being flown, and more than one pilot is required under the type certification of the aircraft or the regulations under which the flight is being conducted. Number 19. To exercise the privilege of a private pilot certificate, what medical certificate is required and how long is it valid? The sun is so shiny. You must hold at least a third-class medical certificate. The medical certificate expires at the end of the last day of A, the 60th month after the month of the date of examination shown on the certificate, if on the date of your most recent medical examination you were under the age of 40, or B, the 24th month after the month of the date of examination shown on the certificate, if the date of your most recent medical examination you were over the age of 40. Third-class medical reform went into effect in 2017, eliminating the need for a third-class medical certificate for many. Visit www.faa.gov for updates on this Part 68 Basic Med. Number 20. Spring has finally arrived and the weather looks great, so you decide to rent an airplane and go fly. The problem is your allergies are giving you a problem and you've just taken your medication. Can you still go fly? The safest rule is not to fly when taking any medication, unless approved to do so by the FAA. Some of the most commonly used over-the-counter drugs, antihistamines and decongestants, have the potential to cause noticeable adverse side effects, including drowsiness and cognitive deficits. 14 CFR prohibits pilots from performing crew member duties while using any medication that affects the body in any way contrary to safety. If there is any doubt regarding the effects of any medication, consult an aviation medical examiner before flying. Number 21. Where can you find a list of medical conditions that may disqualify you from obtaining a medical certificate? The standards for medical certification are contained in 14 CFR Part 67, and the requirements for obtaining medical certificates can be found in 14 CFR Part 61.